Lift up your heart and praise. Lift up your hands and praise. Lift up your voice and praise.
And Moshe said, Hear, O Yisrael, Yahweh your Elohim, Yahweh is one, and you shall love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart, with all your being, and with all your might. And these words which I am commanding you today shall be in your heart, and you shall impress them upon your children. And so speak of them when you sit in your house and when you walk by the way, when you lie down and when you rise up. And you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be frontlets between your eyes, and you shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Shabbat Shalom to everyone worshiping with us at home. It's a privilege to be here today. It's a blessing to be here today, and I hope that we're going to get something out of the message. The name of today's message is called Gentile Ben. Okay? Now, I didn't say Gentle Ben. I said Gentile Ben. Today we're going to have a little study about Gentiles turning to Yahweh. And I had a little trouble settling on a title for this message today. Several of them came to mind. And the close relationship between Gentile and gentle was one of them. It was too hard to resist, so I had to go there with it. But some of them you would have had to have been a certain age to be able to appreciate, just like that one. I thought about Gentile on my mind. That old Glenn Campbell song. So you've got to be a certain age to get the connection. I thought about Gentile persuasion. That would be one that I thought would fit well with the subject matter. I thought about Gentile reminder, and I thought about Gentile touch. And though this is not a play on words, I almost called it Abraham did not have to get circumcised. Because he didn't have to. Did you know that? Abraham did not have to get circumcised, but we'll discuss that a little more in a bit. But I decided to call it Gentile Ben. And this is not a teaching about a boy and his bear. But I called it Gentile Ben because of what John the Immerser, John the Baptist, said. Luke chapter 3, verse 2. Luke chapter 3, verse 2. We're going to be on page 982 in the 98 ISR. Luke chapter 3, verse 2, notice it says, Hanan and Caiaphas being high priests, the word of Elohim came to Yochanan, the son of Zechariah, in the wilderness. And he went into all the neighborhood of the Jordan, proclaiming an immersion of repentance for the forgiveness of sins, as it has been written in the book of the words of YHWH, that'd be Isaiah, the prophet, saying, A voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of Yahweh, make his paths straight. Every valley shall be filled, and every mountain and hill shall be made low, and the crooked shall become straight, and the rough become smooth ways, and all flesh shall see the deliverance of Elohim. He said, therefore, to the crowds that came out to be immersed by him, Brood of adders, who warned you to flee from the coming wrath? Therefore, bear, that's not got anything to do with a boy and his bear. Therefore, bear fruit worthy of repentance, and do not begin to say to yourselves, We have Abraham as our father. For I say to you, Elohim is able to raise up children to Abraham from these stones. And even now the axe is laid at the root of the trees. Therefore, every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. So what has that got to do with Gentile Ben? Because the word Ben means son or children. Well, there are those who believe, mostly because of Paul's writings, that there are just certain things in the Torah that do not apply to Gentiles during this age. And one of the big things is circumcision. We're going to get into that, but with Abraham being the father, well, I'll get to that in a minute. They believe and teach that Gentile converts do not have to be circumcised even to take Passover. All right? And they believe that the taught ones in Jerusalem were in agreement with that. And we'll come back to that, but I remind you that Yeshua said, you don't have to turn here, Yeshua said in Matthew 5:19, whoever then breaks the least of these commands and teaches men so shall be called least in the reign of the heavens, but whoever does and teaches them, he shall be called great in the reign of the heavens. For I say to you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you shall by no means enter into the reign of the heavens. And also, in what we refer to as the Great Commission, we've talked about this several times lately, Matthew 28:19, therefore go and make taught ones of all the nations, that would be what? Gentiles, immersing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the set apart Spirit, teaching them who? The Gentiles, to guard all the things that I have commanded you. Who is you that he's talking to here? His taught ones. What? Them Hebrew folks, they were the Judean Israelites. Okay? And see, I am with you always until the end of the age. Amen. That being the case, I find it dangerous to teach that there are major parts of the Torah, much less least of the commands, which the Gentiles who join themselves to Elohim simply don't have to comply with in the way that Yahshua taught his taught ones. Amen. Especially when Yahweh says that he hates unequal measures and weights. Right? And that surely would be unequal measures and weights, don't you think? Yeah. So, I think it's a big mistake to take a letter that Paul wrote to a group somewhere and make doctrine which contradicts stated instructions in the Word of Yahweh, and to take that doctrine above the teachings of the Word made flesh. Note that I did not say that their doctrine is what Paul was actually teaching, okay? Did not say that. Now, we've looked at some of this recently, but I want to look at this from a slightly broader vantage point. We're going to get back to Abraham in a minute. All right? Look with me at Acts chapter 15. We're going to be starting in verse 1. We're going to be on page 1067 in the 98 ISR. Acts 15, verse 1. And certain men came down from Yehuda, that would be Judah, and were teaching the brothers, unless you are circumcised according to the practice of Moshe, you are unable to be saved. So when Shaul and Barnabas had no small dissension and dispute with them, they arranged for Shaul and Barnabas and certain others of them to go to Jerusalem to the emissaries and elders about this question. So being sent on their way by the assembly, they passed through Phoenicia and Shomeron, relating the conversion of the Gentiles, and they were causing great joy to all the brothers. And having arrived in Jerusalem, they were received by the assembly and the emissaries and the elders, and they reported all that Elohim had done with them. And some of the, now watch this, believers who belonged to the sect of the Pharisees. You see that? That's believers in Yahshua who were Pharisees. All right? They still probably had some Phariseeism in them. Okay? Some of the believers who belonged to the sect of the Pharisees rose up saying, it is necessary to circumcise them and to command them to keep the Torah of Moshe. And the emissaries and the elders came together to look into this matter. Emissaries is what's typically translated apostles, if you're looking in a different translation. Verse 7, and when there had been much dispute, Kepha, that'd be Peter, rose up and said to them, men, brothers, you know what, that a good while ago Elohim chose among us, that by my mouth the Gentiles should hear the word of the good news and believe. And Elohim, who knows the heart, bore witness to them by giving them the set-apart spirit, as also to us, and made no distinction between us and them, cleansing their hearts by belief. Now then, why do you try Elohim by putting a yoke on the neck of the taught ones, which neither our fathers nor we were able to bear? But through the favor of the Master Yahshua Messiah, we trust to be saved in the same way as they. And all the crowd was silent and were listening to Barnabas, Shaul declaring how many miracles and wonders Elohim did among the Gentiles through them. And after they were silent, Jacob answered, saying, men, brothers, listen to me. Shimon has declared how Elohim first visited the Gentiles to take out of them a people for his name, And the words of the prophet agree with this, as it has been written, after this I shall return and rebuild the booth of David, which has fallen down, and I shall rebuild its ruins, and I shall set it up, so that the remnant of mankind shall seek Yahweh, even all the Gentiles on whom my name is called, says Yahweh, who is doing all this, who has made this known from old. Therefore I judge that we should not trouble those among the Gentiles who are, what are those next three words? Turning to Elohim, but that we write to them to abstain from the defilement of idols, and from whoring, and from what is strangled, and from blood. For from ancient generations Moshe has in every city those proclaiming him, being read in the congregation every Sabbath. Now, if you'll notice up here it said that they'd be saved by belief, but then they come down here, they add 4 things that they need them to do. All right? They did add some things that they needed to do. 4, Moshe is taught in every city in the synagogue on every Sabbath. But now, this is why some people think that the taught ones agree with this opinion that the Gentiles do not have to be circumcised at all. Okay? Now, there's a tremendous amount of stuff going on in this passage, but we should not lose sight of the fact that the taught ones did not say that the Gentiles should not be circumcised at all. All right, but directed that the Gentiles who were turning to Elohim go learn Moshe in the synagogue on the Sabbath. All right, and if you'll notice, none of the 4 things put on the Gentiles said to keep the Sabbath. Okay, but that is when and where they should go to learn how to turn to Elohim. Now here is a question for you. Scripturally speaking, what is a Gentile? Huh? Somebody that's not an Israelite. Everybody pretty good with that? Okay. Though at this time, they were calling everyone a Yehudi, a Jew, whether they were from the tribe of Benjamin or whatever. And though there are times when it is referring to a Israelite who is living like a Gentile, it is typically referring to someone who is not an Israelite. All right. So here's another question for you. Was Abraham a Gentile? Father Abraham? Did he just say what I think he said? Was Father Abraham a Gentile, and was he a Gentile that turned to Elohim? You never thought of that one before, did you? Well, he was raised as a heathen. It's in the book. All right. He was raised as a heathen in a house of an idolater, living in the land of Ur. That would be out in the nations, in the land of the Chaldeans. And not only was he not living in the land of Israel, because there was no land of Israel yet, because Yaakov, or Jacob, Yisrael, was Abraham's grandson. Yeah, Abraham's grandson, and he'd not been born yet. Not been born. Isaac, his son. Jacob, Abraham's dad, granddad, great-granddad. That's what I put down. Dad. Yes, that's what I put down to start with. Anyway, anyway, Abraham was not an Israelite anyway because there were no Israelites born yet. All right? And Abraham was not a Jew either. For the same reason. For the same reason, he's not a Jew. Abraham was a Hebrew, but so are the Ammonites. Lot's descendants. So are the Ammonites, and the Moabites, and the Edomites. Them too? Yep. And the Midianites. Midianites are descendants of Abraham. Okay? All these folks, and a whole bunch of other ites. But they were heathens, and they were Gentiles, and so was Abraham. And guess what? Abraham was not circumcised when he first turned to Elohim. A Gentile turned into Elohim that wasn't circumcised. Turn with me to Genesis chapter 12. Bereshit chapter 12. We're going to start reading in verse 1. It's granddad. Genesis 12, verse 1. And Yahweh said to Abram, Go yourself out of the land from your relatives and from your father's house to a land which I show you, and I shall make you a great nation and bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. And I shall bless those who bless you and curse him who curses you, and in you all the clans of the earth shall be blessed. And Abram left as Yahweh had commanded, and Lot went with him, and Abram was how old? 75 years old when he set out from Haran. And Abraham took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the beings whom they had acquired in Haran, and they went out for the land of Canaan, and they came to the land of Canaan. Okay, turn to chapter 17. See, much has happened between Abraham's calling in chapter 17. All right, we'll start looking at verse 1. Bereshit, Genesis 17, verse 1. And it came to be when Abraham was 99 years old. That's 24 years since his calling. Round it, 2.5 decades, okay? And it came to be when Abraham was 99 years old that Yahweh appeared to Abraham and said to him, I am El Shaddai. Walk before me and be perfect. And the footnote in the ISR points out the Messiah gives the same command in Matthew 5:48, just for interest there. And I give my covenant between me and you, and shall greatly increase you. And Abram fell on his face, and Elohim spoke with him, saying, As for me, look, my covenant is with you, and you shall become a father of many nations, and no longer is your name called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, because I shall make you a father of many nations, and I shall make you bear fruit exceedingly, and make nations of you, and sovereigns shall come from you, and I shall establish my covenant between me and you, and your seed after you in their generations for an everlasting what kind of covenant? Everlasting covenant between Elohim to you and your seed after you, and I shall give to you and your seed after you the land of your sojournings. All the land of Canaan is an everlasting possession, and I shall be their Elohim. And Elohim said to Abraham, As for you, guard my covenant, you and your seed after you throughout their generations. This is my covenant which you guard between me and you and your seed after you. Every male child among you is to be what? Circumcised. And you shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall become a sign of the covenant between me and you, and a son of 8 days is circumcised by you. Every male child in your generations, he who is born in your house or bought with silver from any foreigner who is not of your seed. He who is born in your house and he who is bought with your silver has to be circumcised. So shall my covenant be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. And an uncircumcised male child who is not circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin, his life shall be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant. I presume that goes for all these people that aren't actually his descendants, but the ones that are living in the house there that he's talking about, right? Okay. And Elohim said to Abraham, As for Sarai, your wife, do not call her name Sarai, for Sarai is her name. And I shall bless her, and also give you a son by her. And I shall bless her, and he shall become nations. She shall become nations. Sovereigns of people are to be from her. And Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said in his heart, Is a child born to a man who's 100 years old? Or is Sarah, who is 90 years old, to bear a child? And Abraham said to Elohim, Oh, let Yishmael live before you. And Elohim said, No. Sarah, your wife, is truly bearing a son to you, and you shall call his name Yitzhak. And I shall establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant with his seed after him. And for Yishmael I have heard you. See, I shall bless him and shall make him bear fruit and greatly increase him. He is to bring forth 12 princes, and I shall make him a great nation. But my covenant I establish with Yitzhak from Sarah is to bear to you at this set time next year. And when he had ended speaking with him, Elohim went up from Abraham. And Abraham took Yishmael his son, and all those born in his house, and all those bought with silver, every male among the men of Abraham's house, and circumcised the flesh of their foreskins that same day as Elohim told him. All these Gentiles, right? Just saying. All right. And Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. So Abraham, the Gentile who turned to Elohim after 24 years, gets circumcised. I guess his son, his seed that it's talking about to be born next year, would actually be 25 years. He gets circumcised and enters into a covenant with Yahweh. How about that? Isn't that interesting? Does that sound just a little reminiscent of what we're dealing with in Acts chapter 15? Might be. Now, Yahweh didn't put circumcision on him to start with, and he taught him many things working in Abraham's life. But Abraham, the Gentile who turned to Elohim, he did get circumcised. All right, now, look at Genesis 17, verse 25. Let's see, wait, I made a copy of that in there twice. All right. No, that's it. And Yishmael, his son, was 13 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. Abraham and his son Yishmael were circumcised that same day, and all the men of his house, born in the house or bought with silver from a foreigner, were circumcised. All right. And look what Yahweh said to Abraham, to the son of Abraham, about Abraham. Genesis 26. Genesis 26, we're going to start reading in verse 1. There was scarcity of food in the land besides the first scarcity of food, which is in the days of Abraham, and Yitzhak went to Abimelech, the sovereign of the Philistines, in Gerar. And Yahweh appeared to him and said, Do not go down to Mitzrayim. Live in the land which I command you. Sojourn in this land, and I shall be with you and bless you, for I'll give all these lands to you and your seed. And I shall establish the oath which I swore to Abraham your father, and I shall increase your seed like the stars of the heavens, and I shall give all these lands to your seed, and your seed, in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed my voice and guarded my charge, my commands, my laws, and my Torah. I got a question for you about this. What if Abraham had gotten circumcised, but he didn't obey Yahweh after that? It says here, because Abraham obeyed my voice and guarded my commands and my laws and my Torah. So if he hadn't, Yahweh might have said, that's enough of you and your kind. His circumcision wouldn't have amounted to much at all, would it? Okay. We just read part of that where he obeyed Yahweh by getting circumcised, as well as his children and every male in his entourage. Now, this is well before we ever get to Sinai. And what we're going to read next is before we ever get to Sinai. That kind of messes some things up, but that's what's in the book, okay? It doesn't mess things up for us. Exodus chapter 12. Shemot chapter 12. We're going to start reading in verse 23. Exodus chapter 12, verse 23. And Yahweh shall pass on to smite the Mitzrites, that would be the Egyptians, and shall see the blood on the lintel and on the 2 doorposts, and Yahweh shall pass over the door and not allow the destroyer to come into your house to smite you. And you shall guard this word as a law for you and your Ben, your sons. For how long? Forever. All right, this is very important for us to take note of. Okay, this is all right. Just put that back here somewhere. And it shall be when you come into the land which Yahweh gives you, as He promised, that you shall guard this service. And it shall be when your children say to you, "What does this service mean?" Then you shall say, "It is the Passover slaughtering of Yahweh, who passed over the houses of the children of Yisrael in Mitzrayim, when He smote the Mitzrites and delivered our households, and the people bowed their heads and did obeisance. And the children of Yisrael went away and did so, as Yahweh had commanded Moshe and Aharon, so they did. And it came to be at midnight that Yahweh smote the firstborn in the land of Mitzrayim, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sat on his throne, to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of livestock. And Pharaoh rose up early in the night, and he and all his servants, and all the Mitzrites. And there was a great cry in Mitzrayim, for there was not a house where there was not a dead one. Then he called for Moshe and Aharon by night and said, "Arise, go out from the midst of my people, both you and the children of Yisrael, and go serve Yahweh as you have said. Take both your flocks and your herds as you have said, and go. Then you shall bless me too." There was a pretty big deal happening in Mitzrayim that night. Oh man, would you say everybody was may have been a little shook up before, but now they're like, "Oh, this is real. This is real." Okay. All right. Verse 33. And the Mitzrites urged the people to hasten to send them away out of the land, for they said, "We are all dying." And the people took their dough before it was leavened, having their kneading bowls bound up in their garments on their shoulders. And the children of Israel had done according to the word of Moshe, and they had asked from the Mitzrites objects of silver and objects of gold and garments. And Yahweh gave the people favor in the eyes of the Mitzrites, so that they gave them what they asked, and they plundered the Mitzrites. And the children of Israel set out from Ramesses to Sukkot, about 600,000 men on foot, besides the little ones. Do you suppose there was anybody else there besides the Israelites that realized that this was a big deal that was going on? I would say so, because the next thing it says is, "And a mixed multitude went up with them too." All right? Some people want to say this says they're a mixed multitude. It does not say that. It says, "And a mixed multitude went up with them too." In other words, non-Israelites went also. And it begs this question. Are these Gentiles who are turning to Elohim, perhaps? They might be after, because you got to ask this too. Did they put the blood on their doorposts? The word went around, right? Did they put the blood on the doorpost because they were convinced that they'd seen enough to say, "Don't want any part of this. Thus saith Yahweh," and He's been pretty good at what He said so far, and it hadn't been good. All right? It doesn't say why, but it does identify them, this mixed multitude, as being a different gang than the children of Israel, who, for whatever reason, saw going with them to be a better option than staying with Pharaoh. Just that's evident. Amen? Yep, going with the Israelites is a better option than staying with Pharaoh. All right, continuing on. Also, verse 38, "Also flocks and herds, very much livestock. And they baked unleavened cakes of the dough which they had brought out of Mitzrayim, for it was not leavened, since they were driven out of Mitzrayim, and had not been able to delay, nor had they prepared food for themselves. And the sojourn of the children of Israel who lived in Mitzrayim was 430 years. And it came to be at the end of the 430 years, on that same day it came to be that the divisions of Yahweh went out from the land of Mitzrayim. It is a night to be observed unto Yahweh for bringing them out of the land of Mitzrayim. This night is unto Yahweh to be observed by all the children of Israel throughout their generations." Now watch this. "And Yahweh said to Moshe," this is the law of the Passover. No son of a stranger is to eat of it. Okay, so that means Gentiles can't eat it, right? Let's keep reading. No son of a stranger is to eat of it. But any servant a man has bought for silver, that'd be kind of like the ones that Abraham had, maybe. When you have circumcised him, then let him eat of it. A sojourner and a hired servant does not eat of it. It is eaten in one house. You are not to take any of the flesh outside of the house, nor are you to break any bone of it. All the congregation of Israel are to perform it. And when a stranger sojourns with you and shall perform the Passover to Yahweh, let all his males be circumcised, and then let them come near and perform it. And he shall be as a native of the land, but let no uncircumcised eat of it. There is one Torah for the native born and for the stranger who sojourns among you. And the children of Israel did as Yahweh commanded Moshe and Aharon, so they did. Is going to the synagogue on the Sabbath, where Moshe is being taught, a place where you might hear that? Do you think maybe if you're a Gentile who's turning to Elohim and you're going to the synagogue on the Sabbath, as they said in Acts 15, that you might hear this about eating the Passover and being circumcised? I think they might do that. I think they might do that. Okay. Now, this is something that deserves attention. Numbers chapter 9. Bamidbar, chapter 9. I'm going to start reading in verse 13. Page 150. Numbers 9, verse 13. But the man who is clean and is not on a journey and has failed to perform the Passover, that same being shall be what? Cut off from among his people. Because he did not bring the offering of Yahweh at its appointed time, that man bears his sin. And when a stranger sojourns among you, then he shall perform the Passover of Yahweh. He shall do according to the law of the Passover. Remember we read that a while ago? And according to its right ruling, you have one law both for the stranger and the native of the land. Do you think that maybe when a Gentile who's turning to Elohim is going to the synagogue on the Sabbath to learn about Moshe, that he and what he was being taught, that he might hear this, what we just read? Yeah, he might. It would be hard to hear that and one law and say that it doesn't apply to Gentiles today. When Yahshua said, heaven and earth will pass away, but one jot or one tittle shall by no means pass from the Torah, the law be done. And then told his taught ones to make taught ones of all the Gentiles, teaching them to keep everything that he taught his Jewish followers, you know? All right? It'd be kind of hard to hear that and think that. All right? One reason that this is important is because they'd be cut off for not keeping the Passover. And they must be circumcised in order to keep it. Otherwise, as it is written, Elohim is not a respecter of persons. Amen? So, just like Abraham, they might not be circumcised to start with. Okay, remember that? Abraham wasn't circumcised to start with. They might not be circumcised to start with, but they would need to be eventually. All right? The taught ones were simply keeping the same standard for those turning to Elohim versus compelling them right away, as some of these other guys were trying to do. All right? Yahweh put it on Abraham not to start with, but he put it on him. Amen? All right? You know, it's sort of a shame that so much attention has to be given to Paul's letters because of those who twist his words to their own destruction. All right? Paul cannot annul the Torah, neither did he try. All right? I think this may have to have a second part next week just because of how involved it gets, but let's look at a couple of things. 1 Corinthians chapter 7. 1 Corinthians chapter 7. We're going to start reading in verse 18. We're going to be on page 1107. 1 Corinthians 7:18. Was anyone called while circumcised? Let him not become uncircumcised. Okay. Paul is making a point here. You can't get uncircumcised. Okay? You with me? Everybody with me? You can't get uncircumcised. Especially back in Paul's day. He's making a bigger point here about those who were relying on their circumcision for salvation. That's what he's talking about, right? All right. Was anyone called while uncircumcised? Let him not be circumcised. The circumcision is naught, and the uncircumcision is naught, but guarding the commands of Elohim does matter. He's not really saying you should never be circumcised. He's addressing an attitude because he says guarding the commands of Elohim is what we should be doing. All right? Some of those commands involve circumcision. He's not crazy. He knows what he just said. But some of them involve circumcision, just like the commands we just read regarding the Passover. And there's this one, Leviticus 12. Everybody realizes that Paul didn't have a New Testament that he was walking around with and preaching from, right? He had this part of the book back here. And it wasn't KJV. Sorry. Not really. Leviticus chapter 12. You know, when he's talking to Timothy about being raised in the Scriptures, he's talking about these. He's not talking about Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and my letters. Okay? Leviticus 12:2. Speak to the children of Israel, saying, when a woman is conceived and has given birth to a male child, then she shall be unclean 7 days, as in the days of her monthly separation she is unclean, and on the 8th day the flesh of his foreskin is circumcised. This has got nothing to do with the righteousness of the child. This has got nothing to do with the righteousness of the child, and that's why it's really arrogant for these guys to walk around and act like, oh, well, they need to be circumcised because, you know, we're all that because we got circumcised when we were 8 days old like we're supposed to be. All right? But Abraham didn't. This has got to do with the righteousness of the parents to obey the commands of Elohim. Remember, that's what Paul said, but the guarding of the commands of Elohim does matter. And this is a command of Elohim. All right. Let's look at Romans chapter 2. Romans chapter 2. What was our footnote we looked at a while ago here? Oh. I'm going to start reading verse 4. I want to remind you something about Paul and what, you know, there were dynamics in Paul's life and in his world that were different than what we are dealing with today. There was religious, political, I guess you'd say, pressure by the scribes and the Pharisees, those practicing Judaism, which is what Paul practiced in his former way of life, according to what he says in Galatians. All right? And these letters that he's writing to people who are either of those opinions that they're all that because they're Jews, or he's dealing with people who are trying to ferret all this stuff out. What does the Scripture say? What did Yeshua say versus what these guys say who have all these traditions? All right, Romans 2:4. Remember who he's talking to. He's not talking to Christians sitting in the church on Sunday. Or do you despise the riches of his kindness and tolerance and patience, not knowing that the kindness of Elohim leads you to what? Repentance. Repentance from what? Here we go. Sin. What is sin? Transgression of the law. It's real easy when you, okay? But according to your hardness and your unrepentant heart, and I want to remember that about the heart situation there. You are treasuring up for yourself wrath in the day of wrath and revelation of the righteous judgment of Elohim, who shall render to each one according to his works everlasting life to those who, by persistence in good work, seek for esteem and respect and incorruptibility, but wrath and displeasure to those who are self-seeking and do not, what's that word? Obey the truth, but obey unrighteousness. Affliction and distress in every human being working what is evil, of the Yehudit first, and also for the Greek. You got any idea why it says that stuff's going to happen to the Yehudit first and then to the Greek? Because the Yehudit should have been raised knowing the Torah and know what to do versus these new folks, or folks that may have not known it all. All right, but esteem, verse 10, respect and peace to everyone working what is good, to the Yehudit first and also to the Greek. For there is no partiality with Elohim. You think that might mean there's one law for one and the same? Okay, moving right along. For as many as sinned without the Torah shall also perish without Torah. And as many as sinned in the Torah shall be judged by the Torah. No, look at this very closely. For not the hearers of the Torah are righteous in the sight of Elohim, but the doers of the law shall be declared what? Right. Now I remind you that this is the same Paul that said this in Galatians 3:11. I'm just going to read it to you. You're familiar with it. And that no one is declared right by Torah before Elohim is clear, for the righteous shall live by belief. Okay, now we'll work on reconciling that maybe next week. But I'm here to point out to you that we can't just take Galatians 3:11 and act like that trumps everything in the Scripture, because the same guy that wrote that says in Romans 2:13, for not the hearers of the Torah are righteous in the sight of Elohim, but the doers of the law shall be declared right. In the sight of who? Elohim. All right. He's trying to make a bigger point. Verse 14, for when Gentiles who do not have the Torah by nature do what is in the Torah, although not having the Torah, they are a Torah to themselves, who show the work of the Torah written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and between themselves their thoughts accusing or even excusing, in the day when Elohim shall judge the secrets of men through Yahshua Messiah according to the good news. Do you realize that Abraham did not walk around with a book? So I wonder what it says in Isaiah so-and-so. Abraham didn't have that book. Yahweh impressed upon him what was righteousness. All right? He's a Gentile who is doing what's right by what's written in his heart. Not that he's doing whatever's right in his own eyes. Yahweh condemns that. All right? This is not remarkably different here than what Abraham was. Abraham didn't have these scrolls of the Torah. Verse 17. See, you are called a Yehudit, and rest on the Torah and make your boast in Elohim. And know the desire of Elohim, and approve what is superior, being instructed out of the Torah, and are trusting that you yourselves are a guide to the blind, a light to those in darkness, an instructor to foolish ones, a teacher of babes, having the form of knowledge and of the truth in the Torah. You then who teach another. Okay, now we're going to start. This is where it meets the road here. You then who teach another. Now let me ask you this. What are they teaching them? What's written in the Torah? That's what we're just talking about, right? You then, who teach another, do you not teach yourself? You who proclaim that a man should not steal, do you steal? You who say, do not commit adultery. Do you commit adultery? You who abominate idols. Do you rob temples? You who make your boast in the Torah. Through the transgression of the Torah, do you disrespect Elohim? For the name of Elohim is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you, as it has been written. Now look at this. For circumcision indeed profits if you practice the Torah, but if you are a transgressor of the Torah, your circumcision has become uncircumcision. Do you remember what I asked you a while ago when I said, if Abraham, being circumcised, rejected Yahweh's commands, would his circumcision have not become naught? We see that here. So when Paul says your circumcision, the circumcision, where'd he go? For circumcision indeed profits you if you practice the Torah, but if you are a transgressor of the Torah, your circumcision has become uncircumcision. You know why? Because the heart's not circumcised. All right? You got to have both. So, if an uncircumcised one, like Abraham was, watches over the righteousness of the Torah, shall not his circumcision be reckoned as circumcision? And the uncircumcised by nature who perfects the Torah shall judge you, who notwithstanding letter in circumcision are a transgressor of the Torah. For he is not a Yehudite who is so outwardly, neither is circumcision that which is outward in the flesh, but a Yehudite is he who is so inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart, in spirit, not literally, whose praise is not from men, but from Elohim. Now you understand he's not talking about that you shouldn't be circumcised at all. He's talking about just because when you were a baby, and now you are, if you're circumcised and you're acting like an uncircumcised, guess what you're acting like? Gentile that doesn't have the Torah. Look at Deuteronomy chapter 10. We're going to start reading in verse 12. May read. Yeah. Because I remind you, Yahshua said not one jot or tittle, and so his taught ones would have taught the Gentiles what we're about to read here. Deuteronomy 10, verse 12. It says, And now, Yisrael, what is Yahweh your Elohim asking you, but to fear Yahweh your Elohim, to walk in all his ways, and to love him, and to serve him, Yahweh your Elohim, with all your heart and with all your being. To guard the commands of Yahweh and his laws which I command you today for your good. All right, so we see that fear Yahweh right there. That means belief in Yahweh, right? All right. So we see belief and obedience right here, all the way back in Deuteronomy, verse 14. See, the heavens and the heavens belong to Yahweh, your Elohim, also the earth with all that is in it. Yahweh delighted only in your fathers to love them, and he chose their seed after them above all the peoples as it is today. Now look at this. And you shall circumcise the foreskin of your heart and harden your neck no more. Okay? So we see circumcision of the heart, something that was taking place back in Moshe's day. All right? And before, but Moshe, they understood what this means. That your heart needs to also represent, not just as an outward sign of your flesh, but your heart needs to represent inside that you are Yahweh's people. Amen? One more. Deuteronomy 30. Deuteronomy 30, verse 6. Page 218. And Yahweh your Elohim shall circumcise your heart and the heart of your seed, to love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart and with all your being, so that you might live. You know, he's the same yesterday, today, and forever. Just saying. All right. And Yahweh your Elohim shall put all these curses on your enemies and on those who hate you, who persecuted you. And you shall turn back and obey the voice of Yahweh and do all his commands, which I command you today. And Yahweh, your Elohim, shall make you have excess in all of the work of your hand, and the fruit of your body, and the fruit of your livestock, and in the fruit of the ground for good. For Yahweh turns back to rejoice over you for good as he rejoiced over your fathers, if you obey the voice of Yahweh, your Elohim, to guard his commands and his laws which are written in his... All right, now look at this is important, because Paul was saying it's not the Yehudite is the one that's the one inwardly. Amen? All right? if you obey the voice of Yahweh your Elohim to guard His commands and His laws, which are written in His book of the Torah, if you turn back to Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart and with all your being, for this command which I'm commanding you today is not too hard for you, nor is it far off. Right? Do you see that this is about a heart issue? It is. It's about a heart issue. You can't reject this and say you love Yahweh. Right? And it's a heart issue that turns into an obedience issue. Okay, I want to look at one more passage before we conclude today. Isaiah 56. YHWH 56. I'm going to start reading in verse 1, page 457. Isaiah 56 and verse 1. You see, I want you to keep your eye on something here, because Gentiles didn't just start turning to Elohim in the days after Yahshua's death, when His taught ones were going out and missionarying. It started back in Abraham's day. But look at this. Isaiah 56, verse 1. Thus said Yahweh, guard right ruling and do righteousness, for near is my deliverance to come, and my righteousness to be revealed. Blessed is the man who does this, and the son of man who lays hold on it, guarding the Sabbath, lest he profane it, and guarding his hand from doing any evil. Here we go. And let not the son of the foreigner who has joined himself to Yahweh speak, saying. Now, before I go any further, does that sound like the Gentile who is turning to Elohim? The son of the foreigner who has joined himself to Yahweh. Does that? Yeah, kind of sounds like the same kind of guy, doesn't it? Or gal. All right? And let not the son of the foreigner who has joined himself to Yahweh speak, saying, Yahweh has certainly separated me from His people. Nor let the eunuch say, see, I'm a dry tree, for thus said Yahweh to the eunuchs who guard my Sabbath, and have chosen what pleases me, and hold fast to my covenant. To them I shall give in my house and within my walls a place and a name better than that of sons and daughters. I give them an everlasting name that is not cut off. Also, here we go, the sons of the foreigner who joined themselves to Yahweh. That would be Gentile Ben. Okay, that would be Gentile Ben right there. All right. Also, the sons of the foreigner who join themselves to Yahweh to serve Him, to love the name of Yahweh, to be His servant. All who guard the Sabbath and not profane it, and hold fast to my covenant. You do realize that part of that covenant includes circumcision, right? All right. Them I shall bring to my set-apart mountain, and let them rejoice in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their slaughterings are accepted on my altar, for my house is called a house of prayer for all the peoples. The Master Yahweh, who gathers the outcasts of Israel, declares, I gather still others to Him besides those who are gathered to Him. So, in conclusion, did Abraham have to be circumcised? Did he have to get circumcised? I think that's what I should really rather say. No, he didn't have to get circumcised. He's just like you and me. He didn't have to do anything that Yahweh said. He wouldn't have to eat clean or keep the Sabbath. He wouldn't have to not steal or not murder or not commit adultery or not covet or anything else that, if the Torah was written on his heart, would be there, you know. But he wouldn't have to do anything. But neither would he have entered into Yahweh's covenant. Right? There are consequences. Yahweh doesn't make us do anything, but that does not mean that there are not consequences for our actions, because there are. Because He loves those loving Him who guard His commands. All right? But not leaving unpunished. Okay? Right. And whether native born or whether not, Father Abraham was a Gentile who turned to Elohim. Right? And by belief, he turned to Elohim, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. If we believe and obey, we can be children of Abraham, but that'll make us Gentile Ben. Yevrakeka Yahweh ba'ish moreka ya'er Yahweh panavaleka bikuneka. Yasa Yahweh panavaleka bi'asem lakash shalom. Yahweh bless you and guard you. Yahweh make his face to shine upon you and show favor to you. Yahweh lift up his face upon you and give you his complete contentment.